Welcome to Long Story Short, a series where big historical events and themes are explained in a concise way that does not sacrifice facts or analysis. Today's episode is going to examine the events of the Babington Plot, a plan to assassinate Elizabeth I of England, which had lasting consequences. What makes the event so fascinating is how it was indicative of both the religious conflict of England as well as the wider geopolitics of the early modern world. Early modern Europe in the 16th century was a place deeply split by religion, with the events of the Reformation beginning with Martin Luther's 99 Theses in 1517. Europe was essentially separated down confessional lines, with Protestantism being the religion of places such as Scandinavia, parts of Germany and Scotland, whilst Catholicism remained dominant in France, Spain and Italy. Religious minorities still existed, however, which created divisions of those of various religious denominations within the same country. This division existed in England, which during the Tudor dynasty was caught in the throes of a power struggle between the Catholics and Protestants, beginning in the reign of Henry VIII, when he broke from the Catholic Church in the 1530s and dissolved the Catholic institutions in England, including the monasteries. The regents of Henry's son, Edward VI, continued to implement Protestant policy, for example banning religious imagery. When Edward died prematurely, a scramble to place a Protestant successor on the throne ensued, with Lady Jane Grey famously sitting on the throne for 9 days before Mary I took power. Mary was Catholic and reversed the policies of her brother and father, even rejoining the Catholic Church in 1554. The return of Catholicism to the head of the English state was not to last, as Mary died 4 years later, leaving her half-sister Elizabeth on the throne. Elizabeth herself was a Protestant and reintroduced it into the crown's political workings, even making herself supreme governor of the Church of England. This once again sparked conflict with papal authorities, who proclaimed Elizabeth as a heretic and excommunicated her through a papal bull, something which it stated would be extended to English Catholics who continued to remain loyal to Elizabeth. As Muller notes, not only did the bull trigger the generalisation of every English Catholic as a potential traitor to the kingdom, to Elizabeth and her government, it also placed English Catholics in a dangerous and frustrating position, as they had to juggle their national and religious ties to two authorities who had spiritual and secular power over their lives. The Babington Plot was born out of this complexity of the religious and political situation in England. Although named after Anthony Babington, a minor aristocrat who had remained Catholic, the events of the Babington Plot involved as many as 12 figures, including noble Thomas Salisbury as well as former soldier John Savage. One of the key conspirators was John Ballard, an English priest who remained staunch in his commitments to both his Catholic beliefs and his loyalty to the Pope, with him often using his preaching to denounce Elizabeth. These men came together in the view that they could try to restore England to the Catholic faith by assassinating the Queen via a group of 6 armed men. This would clear a path for Elizabeth's cousin, Mary I of Scotland, who was a Catholic herself, to take the throne, with the support of Spain, who would launch an invasion after the group had carried out their end of the bargain, something which would cost Elizabeth her life. However, Elizabeth's government already was on high alert to assassinations, considering that there had already been attempts uncovered before, such as the Throckmorton plot, which happened 3 years earlier. Francis Walsingham, the Queen's secretary and spymaster, placed his own men into the Babington group, such as Robert Poley, who became so close to Anthony Babington that he regarded him as a personal friend. Gilbert Gifford was one of Walsingham's double agents, who he recruited after he was arrested a year earlier. Gifford was a key part of Walsingham's infiltrations, since he acted as a courier from the Babington group to Mary Queen of Scots, who at this point was under house arrest in England. This was to be the downfall of both parties, since Babington sent a letter to Mary on the 6th of July, 1586, seeking her consent to carry out the group's plan, which was to assassinate Elizabeth, break Mary out of her prison, and aid the invasion of England. Mary replied with her own letter 11 days later, which was intercepted by one of Walsingham's cryptographers, who famously placed a gallows mark on his copy of Mary's letter, since he was convinced that the evidence was damning enough that she would face execution. After months of meeting in secrecy and making their plans, the Babington group eventually was arrested. In the August of 1586, they were imprisoned and tortured for information for about a month. Then they were all put on trial between the 13th and 15th of September. All were found guilty. Not only were their lands and anything else of value confiscated by the Crown, the conspirators were sentenced to die. Anthony Babington attempted to avoid his fate by writing to Elizabeth, offering her £1,000 for him not to be executed. This would have been a substantial sum of money back in the Tudor period, but it would not save him or any of his co-conspirators. Their executions happened a week later at St Giles in the Fields in London. It was a public display with the Babington group paraded on the streets, then hung, drawn and quartered in front of a crowd of onlookers. The 12 men involved in the Babington Plot were not the only ones who were doomed. Mary Queen of Scots, who was already an English prisoner at this point, was put on trial in the October. She was accused of treason, as it was believed she played a part in the conspiracy. The letter which she sent in reply to Babington was used as evidence against her. Historians debate whether parts of this letter was forged by Walsingham and his men to ensure that Mary was tried. Despite her attempts at defending herself in front of the panel, Mary was found guilty of treason. Elizabeth was reluctant to sign the death warrant of her cousin, but she deemed that Mary would act as a figurehead as long as she was alive to inspire further plots. Elizabeth stated, "So long as there is life in her, there is hope. So long as they live in hope, we live in fear." Mary was executed via beheading in February 1587, and her body was buried in Peterborough Cathedral, although its final resting place is at Westminster Abbey. The Babington Plot was not the end of religious conflict in England. It would long continue into Elizabeth's reign and outlive her, underpinning later political conspiracies as well as the policy of the Crown for hundreds of years to come. Hi there, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing. I also have an Instagram and a TikTok page which I have linked below. Again, thank you so much for watching. I have been Our Historia, and until next time.